Who drives the deal to move the needle, to keep it moving, to get you to a closing? How critical is that? And who should take charge? And when is it crucially important for that person to take charge?
Welcome back to the BDO Show, a podcast for passionate BDOs wanting to level up their game with advice and stories from battle-tested BDOs. I'm your co-host, Emily Detour, and I'm here with my fellow co-hosts, Alan Peterson, Chris Hackney, Sterling Birdsong, and again, special guest, Ryan Kroge. Thank you for being with us. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if there's anything you want to hear, questions, or topics you'd like to see discussed on the show, please shoot us a quick email at thebdoshow@gmail.com. BDOs. Have you ever had a borrower bring in like a brother-in-law to do their life insurance? Doesn't end well, does it? We've all been there. When you require life insurance on your SBA loan, it's critical that you bring in a company that specializes in getting these policies in place for the SBA loans. The last thing you want is for life insurance to be the holdup. We all know that's a rookie mistake. SBA Protection Quick Close Life Insurance is the fastest, easiest way to secure the insurance protection that your borrower needs for their SBA loan. Their process is simple, hassle-free, and only takes a few minutes of your borrower's time. No lengthy paperwork, no complicated forms. They even have programs that don't require labs or doctor records for approval. And best of all, you will have the collateral assignment back in less than 24 hours. It's a no-brainer. Go to sbaprotection.com for more information or email Adam Bergen at adam@sbaprotection.com. So today we're going to be discussing who drives the deal. I'd like for Ryan to kick us off with the conversation and see where it goes from there.
Great. Thanks, Emily. It's critically important for every BDO. We have referral sources, we have borrowers, we have sellers. Sometimes it's a refinance, but who drives the deal to move the needle, to keep it moving, to get you to a closing? How critical is that? And who should take charge, and when is it crucially important for that person to take charge? As the BDO, we are in charge of the money, we're in charge of the funding, we're in charge of the approvals, the closing, the underwriting process, everything. So to a greater extent, yes, we like to drive the deal. We like to drive a deal from a funding standpoint. But when it comes to other aspects of what we do, sometimes it's critically important that you have a loan broker drive the deal when you're not able to take it any further, or a selling broker or a buying broker, or sometimes it's the accountant or the attorney who gets to actually have the final say in gatekeeping and making sure that it gets to a closing table. So in different scenarios, we just want to talk about what and who is the best person to drive the deal.
Yeah, I can kick us off there. So, no, ultimately, I agree with you, Ryan. I think it is primarily the BDO that drives the deal. I think that's probably the proper way that it should work. However, I think I take a different approach than a lot of other BDOs. I'm actually kind of a hands-off guy. I like to be heavily involved in the beginning of the process, talking to the customer, making sure that we have a good relationship. They know who I am. I know who they are. I kind of know the deal, but really only at a high level. I kind of only want to know what I have to know. I'm very precise in the questions that I ask the customer, just making sure that I kind of understand the deal. But all of my questions are pointed towards essentially the stuff that I need to know in terms of, do I feel like I can get this done here, or can I not get it done here? Because if I feel like I can't get it done here, I really just want to move on and go find somebody else and allow them to move on and go find somebody else. But once I kind of get that initial information, then at that point, I will kind of hand it off to the process. I kind of let the process do the work a little bit. I tend to be a little bit more hands off. I want to get them to a term sheet. I want to get them signed up, and then I want to get them into our pre-underwriting bucket, right? But I don't really want to be involved in pre-underwriting. I don't necessarily want to be involved in document collection. I don't feel like that's the best use of my skill set. I'm blessed to work at a bank where really we have a good process in place, where it's kind of like a conveyor belt where, the loan moves from point A to point B to point C, and then point D essentially being closing. I will be involved in underwriting, obviously, to a certain extent when questions come out. I think that's probably where I'll be the most involved throughout this process. But in theory, I want to be involved as little as possible while still getting you to the closing table. Okay. If I have to get too involved, that usually means that something went wrong. because I tell you one thing, I will 100% be involved if something goes wrong. Because if something goes wrong, I'm going to basically attack it, right? I'm going to go directly to whatever that problem is. I'm going to immediately try and solve that problem so that I can keep a deal working. And I find that works best for me because realistically, if I'm trying to do 50 million a year and I'm trying to close somewhere between 30 and 40 transactions a year, I can't handhold everybody. Right. So I have to kind of rely on my process to do a lot of that, quote unquote, hand holding for me and kind of shepherd a borrower through the process from start to finish. So I want to make sure that I'm available to, number one, go out and find new loans and new opportunities so I can continue to kind of feed this pipeline. But also, number two, to be available for things like, hey, there's an equity injection problem. How are we going to overcome this? Hey, credit has an issue with this. How are we going to overcome that? Or, hey, there's a committee presentation tomorrow. Who's going to do the committee presentation? Well, I'll answer it. It's always going to be me. Okay. I do all my committee presentations. I have not, relinquished that duty. I know, Chris, sometimes you'll allow, Hannah to go and do some of those committee presentations, but it's always me. So I know how to be involved in key parts of the process to continue to make the deal move. But in terms of who's driving it, ultimately it's the BDO, but I also kind of let the process work for itself.
So you find it to be important for one person to drive the deal then?
I don't know. No, I don't think I do find it important for one person to drive the deal. I think that there should be ultimately one person, quote unquote, responsible if something goes wrong. But in terms of who's driving the deal from, point A to point B, I tend to be a little bit more hands off, and I let people who are the experts in their part of the process drive their part of the process. Overall, I really see myself more as managing the people who are in the process while they are the ones who are really driving the deal forward. I don't really want to get involved in what people's expertise is.
Yeah. And it's just like your tribe, right? Like the last episode when we covered that. The team all involved also matters, I think, to an extent, right? I know that I definitely have scenarios where I can be totally hands off in closing and I can wait around and get that notification that the deal is done and it feels great, right? But there's other folks at times where I need to be a little more hands-on or I need to break it down for the borrower. That's something I had to do today. I took a closing checklist and I just really dumbed it down. And the borrower was happy and he was able to kind of start getting things moving and maintaining momentum. I prefer not to do that if I don't have to, but I know that I have to, because at the end of the day, if the loan doesn't close, it's on me.
Right. Those are both good points. And as BDOs, obviously, we want to drive the deal, and then our tribe is going to pick up the ball and they're going to take it right to the end zone. And it's touchdown, perfect transaction, perfect deal, closed within 45 days. All is great, right? Well, if you're working with an acquisition, business acquisition, you've got sellers, you've got buyers, you've got people already working within that business, working within that industry. They've got a lot on their plates. So a lot of times they're not paying attention to your closer. They're not really looking at emails. So while I drive the deal and while I hand it, like Sterling said, hand it off to your closer and your tribe to really take it down the field and score the finishing touchdown, it's important. I like to keep the broker also engaged and ensure that when things are not working or things are not progressing, that they actually a lot of times have that hands-on feel. Now, being that I do a lot of my stuff local, I'm kind of hands-on because I could always stop by, knock on the door and say, hey, buddy, what's up? But from a national standpoint, a lot of times these brokers are more local than I am. And from my perspective, I've noticed that the selling broker tends to have the most control over getting the final items to a closing table than really anybody else in the process. It's either
They
the
have more
selling broker
access
or the selling attorney. Because let's face it, when things start to stall and things start to break down towards the end of the line, it's generally on the sales side of the transaction. They're either caught up and think everything is done, or it's just gotten to a point where it's starting to drag out a little bit because there's been so many bumps in the road. There's been low appraisals, business valuations. Sometimes there's just a sticking point on the purchase agreement. Whatever the case may be, it's usually broken down and then it's stalled on the seller side. So if you have that's why I personally love dealing with brokers that have a lot of listings, because when you have them on their side, they're getting paid when that loan closes. right? They're getting paid when that transaction goes because they've got the seller under an agreement to get paid when that transaction happens. So they are incented, like we're incented to get these closed and at the finish line. So getting them on your side and saying, hey, man, we've got a problem. It's stalled. Our guys got most of the stuff in. We just need bill of sale, resolution, whatever the case may be in, and your guy's not responding. The attorney's not responding. Can you help me get this across the finish line?
And they've been with the deal. Yeah, and they've been with the deal, the selling broker, the longest out of anyone in the transaction, right? The sales cycle on a business acquisition, I think we often forget, is typically 12 months if you're lucky. Sometimes 18 months before you find the listing, you talk to the seller, they want to list it for 17 times EBITDA, you talk them down to a reasonable figure, you go out, you find buyers, this buyer has no money, this buyer's a tire kicker, right? And you actually find the right buyer. Oh, then let me find the right lender, and this lender can't actually get the deal done. So when they get to the financing stage, they are absolutely going to drive that deal home because they've been with the deal for 10 months prior. Why would they not help Ryan get the resolution, all the documents that he needs for the last 2 weeks to get this thing through the finish line?
And so they like money.
Absolutely. Let alone they're getting a commission on the deal, getting a referral
shout outs
fee.
for First Lehman.
But they're getting compensated as well. And plus, you just don't want to waste all of that time that you've spent with the seller and the buyer prior to the financing piece. So I absolutely leverage selling brokers on transactions that involve an M&A type of deal.
Do you guys think all brokers are equal when it comes to that?
No.
I mean, there's Gmail brokers, right? We've seen them all. Shout out to
Can you
Gmail
explain
brokers.
what a Gmail broker is?
I will. They remind me of myself when I was a broker a little bit, as you might remember from episode 74. The Gmail broker is a real challenging individual to work with because they're hoping for the best, right? I think that you've got the Gmail broker at the bottom. You've got the loan broker next, okay? The loan broker is better. They understand the process, but they're not quite as vested as the business broker, right? In my opinion, that would be the hierarchy. I think that, a strong business broker understands how to get the deal done. They've oftentimes coached the borrower to have a real deal team, right? To actually have a due diligence that they're doing on their own. They have an attorney who understands M&A transactions. Like when you get those deals, that's when, in my opinion, things go a lot smoother. But when you have someone who's sort of waiting around to see if they get paid in 60 to 90 days, and it's Alan SBA loans at gmail.com, you got problems.
Yeah, I like the business broker as well. They're the closers. They are the ones that close the deals. They don't get the steak knives. They get the Cadillac, baby, because they are always closing and they know how to close and they know how to bring it to the closing table on that sales side, on that buyer side, where we may not be getting communication effectively on our side, which
they've got more
be treated as a BDO.
They've got more. They've got a commission on the sale. A loan broker is getting paid on the loan itself, the referral fee. Business broker is getting the referral fee from the lender and commission on the sale of the business, which is greater than the referral fee. So oftentimes,
the way I would describe business brokers is that working with business brokers is way more work on the front end for a BDO, but it results also in way less work on the back end for the BDO. And what I mean by that, and part of the reason why I haven't always gone towards working with business brokers is they'll have you do a lot of busy work. Let's be honest. Sometimes you feel like an extension of their team, right? Because they'll say, hey, prequal this, prequal this, prequal this. Look at this. What do you think it's worth? They'll ask you a lot of these questions and you have to do a lot of legwork and you put all these prequals out there. And, let's be honest, we've all gotten calls from buyers and then they send you a prequal from another bank, right? So that guy went and did this work and now you're going to get his deal and you're going to close on it, right? So that if you put 10 of those prequals out there, maybe 2 or 3 are going to call you, so you're going to do a lot of work on the front end. That's one thing with the loan brokers is that when a loan broker calls you, it's usually because he has a deal and it's active and it's ready to get moved on right now. However, the trade-off for that is that, like you guys said, when you're working with a business broker at the end of the process, they are going to drive that process because they want to get home. We all know that they get incentivized heavily They're very commission driven the same way that we are. And so, they're going to go ahead and drive that deal home because, as Chris said, they've probably been working on this for 12 months. If anybody has deal fatigue, it's them. Right. So they want to go ahead and they want to see the end of the transaction the same way you do. And the thing with them is that they usually have pretty deep connections and a good relationship with all parties at that point as well. They've definitely talked to the seller. They probably had a good relationship with the buyer as well. Sometimes when it comes to loan brokers, by the end of the transaction, I know the customer better than they know the customer, right? They may have had one or two interactions with the customer in the very beginning, and then they kick it over to you, and then they just have you drive it from start to finish. So it is a very different process when it comes to closing. It just really depends on what you really want to deal with.
So, and I think that goes back to Emily's question: are all brokers created equal? Because I have one really good loan broker, one amazing loan broker that gives me a full package, explains it all perfectly, already has it structured for me. Like you said, Sterling, right up front, boom, it's a no-brainer, it's a piece of cake, and he's already got me sold to the customer. I've got other loan brokers that are Gmail loan brokers. They'll shoot me a name and number and say, hey, you got the deal if you want it. But what I've experienced in a lot of the loan brokers I've spoken to, they're more concerned about how much is the bank going to pay you. They're not really concerned about the deal. They're not concerned about how quick you can do it, how better you are than the next bank. It's all about how much are you going to pay me for this deal. And personally, I don't want to deal with that. And I won't deal with that. These tire kickers, these rates, bye. I've got more to do than to try to be talked up from one point. It's just not going to happen.
The BDO Show email is going to go from topics to brokers being like, hey now.
We love all brokers here at whatever the bank.
Especially my broker.
If Ryan doesn't, I do. And I can give you my email address. Hit me up.
The only brokers I love more than my own are Sterling's.
Ooh, nice.
What I like about the seller, the listing broker, though, is that most of the time the listing broker will also find the buyer. And so you've got a captive audience on both ends. And at the end of the day, that listing broker is going to drive the deal all the way through, make my job easier, make my closer's job easier. If they're well organized, everybody's going to be happy. I've got a broker down in Florida that she creates a whole entire data room, extremely organized. So by the time I get the transaction for the pre-qual and then the buyer, my underwriter, my packager, my closer has access to all this. And it saves a lot of miscommunication, saves a lot of back and forth, and they get all that information right up front. It's fantastic.
So we touched on a lot. So we have a motivated BDO, we have a motivated broker, we have a motivated team. Sorry, guys. So that's a hard word to say 3 times in a row. Motivated. Everyone's motivated. So which stage of the deal, Alan, do you believe needs the most attention with everybody motivated? And which stage of the deal do you believe needs the least, especially for new BDOs out there? They got good momentum. Where can we put focus the most, and where can we kind of let go a little? Where do you think?
Yeah, I think that it kind of varies, right? I mean, everyone's shop is different. Everyone's tribe is different. But as a generalization for me personally, I think closing is one place where I'm going to focus my attention, right? That's where I'm going to make sure things are moving. And if I do a pulse check on a current closing and it looks like everyone's making good momentum, I'm out of there and I'm going to go back to doing what I'm best at, right? I think underwriting is where we can put the least amount of really contribution in, because we're going to wait for our underwriter to come up with some questions, the things they need to complete the memo, that riveting 32-page document with spreadsheets and data that's going to be submitted for ultimately for approval. But we should have already got them prepared, right? That first step that we prepared the deal, we did our write-up, our part is done at that stage. In my opinion, closing is where I'm going to put my focus, unless we're talking about new deals, prospecting, and getting things into the queue, right? I think that would be really where my time is best spent.
As far as stage, to me, closing, you gotta keep everyone engaged in the closing stage. A lot of deals can die in the closing stage for a number of reasons. You're talking non-competes, seller note structuring, lease agreements, right? Some of that stuff you can start prematurely or early in the process, but in closing, that's when it really gets finalized. And having a good selling broker who drives the deal can have those conversations in addition to you with both buyer and seller to kind of deliver that message in a certain way where you get things done and it doesn't become too contentious between all the agreements being signed and negotiated in that point. So I definitely try to keep attention on the closing aspect of a transaction. Underwriting, that kind of, it does its own thing there. You answer a few questions, you have a borrower call, and you're good to go. In the earlier stage, you're just getting to know the borrower and who they are and why they want to buy the business. But closing is super important, that you are driving the deal as a BDO and your referral partner is helping you drive the deal and deliver the messages that may be good or not so good in the closing stage, because you've worked so hard to get it there. Don't have it fall apart.
So here's a great follow-up question. We're talking about some really good brokers, right? Brokers that give you complete packages up front. They've already negotiated the deal up front, which makes it easy for you and makes the underwriter's job easy as well. And then when it hits the closer, they drive it all the way home. So what do we do when we get those Gmail brokers? We get just a name and a phone number. We don't really have anybody externally driving the deal. And it's very hard on the communication side for us to really drive it and keep everybody's attention.
Yeah, I was gonna say, pick up the phone, man. That's usually the path of least resistance. I mean, like I said earlier, I tend to try and stay out of it until I need to be into it. But when I'm into it, I'm all the way into it. If that means I'm going to pick up the phone and call a buyer or a seller or whoever it's going to be, I'm not really going to let anything stop my deal from closing if I can help that. And so, I will go to the end of the earth to essentially track somebody down. I remember, showing up at landlords' offices at my last bank to try and get landlord lien waivers signed. Like, hey, I'm not going to go away till you sign this and we can close this loan, so in those situations, that's why you are still there as the BDO and the salesperson. And, you also should be able to tell your referral source, hey, can you help me out here? Because, you're getting paid for this referral the same way that I'm getting paid. We both have a vested interest here. So, there's no shame in also saying, hey, man, can you help me out here because your borrower is not getting back to me, or the seller's not getting back to me, or the buyer's not getting back to me. Just pick up the phone and don't stop dialing until you get a yes, until you get an answer you want to hear, basically.
So I'm going to ask a question just because I've never heard the word Gmail brokers. Maybe some people haven't. And I know you guys sort of explained it, but would you ask questions like, if you pick up the phone and you chat, like, what are your years of experience? Have you worked with these types of deals before? Like, are these the questions you're asking those Gmail brokers?
I've actually turned Gmail brokers into legitimate brokers before. And that's true.
You made an
if I have
honest
the
man out
band,
of them?
yeah, I've almost made them. I've helped them turn it all around. I've showed them the future of the internet. What happens is I get the people involved early on and I explain to them, what do you know about SBA? Are you currently doing SBA deals? There's plenty of merchant cash advance guys that'll send you an email. I've got a $55 million development in Puerto Rico. I need to go SBA with it, right? And it doesn't even make sense. You get a lot of that, but if you also get some folks that understand, they really are trying to learn SBA. And I think that, we would do ourselves a disservice by immediately writing those folks off. I think that if you try to kind of nurture, mentor, and kind of, influence them and in the way that we need to do business and the types of opportunities we want to see, you can give them some quick benchmarks on things to see in a deal to know if they're real or not. If you do that once, twice, don't do it a third time. Your charitable work has come to a close and you got to get on with your life, because some folks unfortunately just don't get it, or they're not really that motivated to truly learn SBA, and they've got a one-off deal they're trying to find a home for. And there's banks that'll entertain that stuff. I'm personally just not one of them.
I agree with you, Alan. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with brokers that just want to hand a name and a email, but a lot of them have come up and just said, hey, I don't know anything about SBA. I hear it's a great program. What do I need to know? And having that opportunity to coach and become a mentor and create a monster. I mean, you create a monster, you get them sharp to know what they're talking about when they're talking to a client. I mean, you got a fan for life, man. He'll send you every deal that comes at you because he's trusted you to give him the ammunition to go out there and be a warrior, which is phenomenal. I like that.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's the best part about it. I mean, last year at NACLB in Las Vegas, I got to meet with a new loan broker who closed his first ever SBA deal with me, and we got to hang out in person. And it was honestly, awesome. It was awesome. It was really, really powerful stuff. And you better believe I'm his first look on everything he sees now, and some of it has got legs. So I think it takes a little bit of patience. You don't immediately write off the quote unquote Gmail broker. That's more of a term that there's an implied, it's a little derogatory. But the fact is, if some folks just don't get it or they're not willing to, and they're wasting your time, forget about it. If somebody comes to you, like Ryan said, hey, I don't know much about SBA, but I'm willing to learn, I'll give those people some time, the way people did that for me when I was coming up.
We said this on the last episode that like education in all parts of this industry is just key to everyone's success at all times. Another question that popped into my head when we were talking about brokers and like, who's important in the deal, like what do you have to put to your most attention, your least attention? What happens if there's a two-part question here? What happens if you see a stall in momentum towards your deal? Who's your first call? And also, if you see a deal stall, how do you regain traction? So why don't we start with Sterling to do part one and part two, and then we'll move on.
So I'd be lying if I told you that, if I get a call or if I find out that there's a stall in the deal, the first person I'm calling is Austin Porter. And I hope Austin's watching this because Austin
Porter.
Austin's my associate lender, so he's basically my right hand man. And he's in the background. He's in Chris's background right now.
The only person that's in my office, I have nothing in here, no personal effects, but Austin Porter and I.
Yes, and that's not even a character. That's what Austin actually looks like.
Yes,
but yeah, no. So that's the first person I'm going to call, and I'm going to say, hey, what's going on with this deal? Because I know for a fact that Austin's going to know what's going on with this deal, even if I am, not 100% aware of what's going on, because he's really boots on the ground. I mean, he is like, in these files and he knows exactly what's going on at all times. So he's gonna be the very first person that I call. After that, he's gonna basically tell me what the problem is or who the problem is. And then it's up to me to essentially then go address whatever that problem is. Sometimes we kind of play a good cop, bad cop thing here, where, obviously he's the good cop. And sometimes I have to be the quote unquote bad cop. Not that I'm ever mean to people, but, sometimes, you have to make sure people understand their role in the process and what needs to happen. So that's essentially the way that it works for me. It's first diagnosing the problem and then, again, making sure that you're available to then attack that problem.
Story for me, and I would not advise this, but there have been a couple times where I pulled a direct call to the seller. If I've got their information and I'm close with the broker, I had a situation on it was a restaurant, actually a parcel change of ownership, and we needed the lease agreement and we were waiting on it and buyer was getting antsy and, we had a deadline to meet as far as our earnings in the bank. And so I just reached out to the seller, actually the seller's husband. He didn't even own the business because he was on an email. He was helping provide the documentation. I said, look, man, I think this deal's going to blow up. I'm talking to the buyer. They're getting nervous. I know this is a large transaction for your family. This is a life event. I'd hate to get this far. Is there anything you can do with the landlord? I know you've occupied this space for, 15 years. You've got to have a relationship. We need this in the next couple of days, or I can't say that we're going to be able to close this. And he was like, Chris, I got you. I thank you for calling me. You didn't have to do this. And I appreciate you. He actually thanked me. I thought he was going to say, why are you even calling me? Who gave you my number? But I found it in one of those emails early on, the email chains. And I pulled that card a number of times. Now, I wouldn't advise that because your broker might be upset. You might want to clear it with your broker first if you have to pull that card. But it has worked for me in the past because the seller, they want their money, right? If they're 2 or 3 weeks from getting that deal closed and they know that a couple documents are in the way that they control or can have influence on obtaining, they're going to make sure that that happens. And sometimes they might not be aware. The business broker might have told them, hey, we're working on the lease. Don't worry about it. They're running a business still, right? That's not yet sold. They might not know that this is a critical item. And if I don't get this in the next few days, my buyer's walking. They might not feel that pressure or that tension. So sometimes I'll call them and just kind of give them, hey, this is what's really happening on your deal here in the $2 million life event for your family.
You just let them know you're worried about it.
Yes, I'm nervous about
Is it going to make it?
Is the deal going to make it?
Right. Yeah, I like to, everyone makes really good points. I've got a couple different scenarios that I usually go through, especially once it gets to the closing stage. That's when a lot of these items can start to stall because you're waiting for reports, you're waiting for a ton of paperwork, and they've got their marching orders, they got their checklist on both sides of the fence, right?
Nitty-gritty details.
So usually when it goes into closing, we have our kickoff call. And what I like to do is I like to set expectations right up front. I'm like, look, your purchase agreement here expires at the end of next month. If you need to close before this, I've got to have all this stuff by a certain date. And I'll give them that date and say, you got to shoot for this date. Now that means you've got all these reports coming in at these other dates. Don't wait till the last minute. Start getting it in. Because if we review it and there's something wrong with it, and now you've got to go back to legal, go back to the seller, get it all renegotiated, that's going to kick your closing date off. So you've got to come up right up front and get this information as soon as possible. So when something does stall and we don't have it, I get to call them up, and my closer will immediately call me because she's taking notes, writing these dates down. She'll call me and say, hey, Ryan, we're approaching the 7th and they still don't have this, that, or the other. I'll call them up and remind them of our conversation and say, look, we're going to have to start kicking the closing date out if we can't get this reviewed in a timely manner. I had a situation a couple of years ago, a little bit off topic from setting expectations, where we were getting down about 2 weeks out from closing. Everything was going well. And then we needed the seller to sign his, because it was a stock purchase, we needed him to sign his resignation. And then we needed to sign a couple other documents as well before we got to the closing. And he just wasn't responding to his attorney, emails, or anything like that. And so got worried, like, is the guy okay? And the attorney says, well, I just saw him today. I know he's okay, but I just can't get a hold of him to sign these last documents. And so a couple days went by and I pulled a hackney. I actually knew his nephew really, really well. I grew up a couple blocks away from him. And so I just called him up, asked him how things were going, this, that, and the other, and said, hey, I saw your uncle not too long ago. Is he doing all right? He's like, oh, yeah, he's great. I just saw him, had dinner. He's like, hey, do me a favor. Tell him to call me right away as soon as you see him. And he called him up, texted him, said, you need to call Krogi. Got on the phone, talked to me, and I found out his email wasn't working. They were sending everything to the wrong email address from the print off and get that stuff done. And so it just took a little ingenuity kind of going around the side and using other people that you knew just to get him to say, hey, man, send it to the right email address and you'll get it done. So sometimes you just got to jump all over it and find a way to get everybody on topic.
What about referral partners who are a little too involved in the deal and they're trying to drive it? How do you navigate that and sort of set expectations, Alan?
In my experience, that hasn't really been that prevalent of a problem. I think that at times, if I pass on a deal and a partner tries to really oversell me on why this non-cash flowing, projection-based ground-up construction deal is a home run, sometimes those are friends that we get distant, right? We sometimes those aren't exactly the partners I want to work so closely with. But usually, as far as being too involved throughout the process, I like to make sure that I keep my partners included and updated, but also let them know at a certain point that the banks, the attorneys, the borrower directly, they're going to be handling the lion's share. And what I need them to do is simply keep things moving, keep folks motivated and pushing things along without disrupting the process or interjecting themselves unnecessarily.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that as well, Alan. You know, it is actually fairly rare that I think you have somebody where all of a sudden they want to take over, but it does happen from time to time. And I think that the key there is understanding and remembering that, like, and I have to tell people this sometimes, like, hey, man, we're all rowing in the same direction. Just remember that we're kind of all on the same team here. And, my closer wants to get this done. My underwriter wants to get this done. I want to get this done. I know you want to get this done. We all want to get this across the finish line. So, just be a little patient. Remember the bank is working as fast as it can, but it can also only work as fast as perhaps your customer, your borrower, who's not getting us the information that we're asking for in a timely manner. So just kind of making sure that, expectations are set in regards to what's realistic too, and hitting those types of deadlines. Hey, we're not going to close in 2 weeks. We're going to close in 4. So don't come to me in week 3 and be upset and trying to basically, shove something down somebody's throat in the process because you feel like, a bull in a china shop approach is going to get this done and across the finish line, because that's not really how this works. So really, it just kind of comes down to, you have to, again, as the BDO, be able to wrangle your referral source. Sometimes the same way you have to be able to, speak to people in your process and also make sure that they're all on the same page. And again, we're all rowing in the same direction.
I want to coattail off of what Sterling said real quick with another question. So you get through the closing process and it's like Murphy's Law. Anything that could go wrong does go wrong. You've got a low appraisal, so you've had to go back and renegotiate with the seller. You've got environmental issues, so now the buyer has to go out and get a phase 2, some remediation, a couple of different reports to be able to close that up. You've got inventory counts that aren't going right. It's like every stage something's going wrong, and it's everything that's out of my control, the seller's control, the buyer's control. How do you deal with deal fatigue? The transaction fatigue, where the sellers and the buyers sit back and they're like, man, is the universe trying to tell me something? I've got everything going wrong on this transaction. It's just not going through, but it's a good transaction. You've got a great buyer to be perfect for this business, and you got a selling business that is going to be a viable going concern going forward. How do you get them back on track to say, act as counselor, right? Because sometimes we have to be a counselor. How do we get them back on track?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. I personally, I'll pick up the phone again. That's our recurring theme at the BDO show. And tell stories.
Phone phobia.
No phone phobia.
That's
tell
right,
stories, man. Right? Tell the borrower how you overcame a phase 1, right, that had a wreck on it, right, and what you did in that scenario. Tell the borrower, okay, this. The appraisal came back, but here's what I've done in the past on a similar type of transaction, right? And we overcame that. That gives the buyer or borrower some confidence and reassurance that you, as the expert that you are, the BDO, you've overcome this obstacle before, and you'll be able to navigate them through this again, right? So I always tell, hey, phase 1, that's happened to me before. Yeah, it sucks, costs a little bit of money, but here's what we got to do. And here's the timeline and the expectation. And at the end of 3 weeks, we should have this resolved and we'll be moving forward into closing, right? Like, oh, okay, great. He gave me an example. I have a timeline. I have some confidence and reassurance, right? I'm just not totally in the dark thinking my deal is blowing up on me. So yeah, definitely just telling some stories that you've been successful at overcoming those obstacles.
Yeah. And I think it's also just all about how you talk to people, especially when you know that they're towards the end of the process and their nerves might be a little bit frayed. I like to try and remind people why they're doing what they're doing. Why did you go through this entire process to buy this business? What is it really going to do for you? And remind them how far they've come along this way as well, especially if they're already in the closing process. I mean, they've already really run most of the gauntlet at this point, and we're really just kind of working through these last little details here to kind of get them through this tail end of the process. And, we didn't come this far to just come this far, right? So we'll leave it at that.
That's like a Black History Month thing, right? Did you steal that?
I did steal it, but I'm not going to tell you where from because it just sounds terrible if I say it.
That's from Joe Biden. Where's that from?
It's not from Joe Biden. It's actually from Kim Kardashian.
I think Joe Biden said something.
The Kardashians.
And it was in a Drake song
my goodness.
6 months ago.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. It's topics like these that drive the conversations. They get more interesting as the weeks go on. If you haven't heard any of our past episodes, go ahead and subscribe, listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, whatever your favorite streaming platform is. We'll be there with you every step of the way and every week. If you guys have any other questions you want to hear or topics you want to discuss, send us over a quick email at thebdoshow@gmail.com. And again, we'll see you next time.